David, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. It is such an honor to be asked back.
Well, so for the audience, episode 210 from 2018, that link will be in the show notes. You could check out the beginnings of David's story and his journey and kind of get a bird's eye view into that part of it. But now we're going to concentrate on just kind of seeing where you're at today and then diving into whatever topics we dive into. So give us the update. Where are you at today geographically? What is the state of the state for you?
So I'm still in Portland, Oregon, where I was last time we talked. Even though I work out of a big studio for tracking, I have my own personal studio. I have moved locations of that studio since the last time we talked, just circumstances of the building I was leasing back then. I had to move, and I actually like the new location a little bit better, so that works out. But yeah, Portland's still great, still a great music scene. Obviously, there have been a few things that happened globally in the past, 5 or 6 years. So that was an interesting time, and things have changed since COVID a little bit. The music scene, I think, is still kind of coming back, and it's just different now a little bit. But still a lot of people here doing interesting stuff and a lot going on. Maybe in a lot of ways, the state of the state for me is pretty similar to what it was before. Yeah, so I still do a mix of live sound and recording work, so that hasn't changed that much.
Do you have a preference between studio work and live work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really enjoy doing both. So I wouldn't necessarily ever want to do just one. I probably enjoy recording work a little bit more, just because it's maybe an opportunity to be a little bit more creative. You can try things out and do interesting things that you definitely wouldn't do in a live show. But the live show is great too. The immediacy of the live show, the direct, your audience that you're mixing for is right there. You get to see their reaction, and it's exciting. And there's this adrenaline of it's all happening in the moment, and that's really cool too. And there's something magical about live performance, and actually that's something I try to capture in the studio a lot. I prefer, and most of the time I record bands live with at least most of the rhythm section. Maybe if there's a horn player or something, we might do that as an overdub or whatever. But I like that interaction of musicians and the moment and them playing off of each other. And so live sound is very much about that. But so is the studio, I think, ideally.
A lot of pressure in live sound from my perspective, and I'm wondering if over time, let's say in your first 5 years of doing live sound versus say now, I would assume that your confidence level and mastery of that venue, not trying to, not to make a pun about the venue of the
Yeah.
club, but the venue of live sound. Has your confidence grown over the years?
Oh, 100%. Like my first couple of years, I talk about my origin story during the first episode, so we won't get into too much of that. But I started in school, and it was, kind of a casual, student activities thing at first. And so, gradually got into live sound, and it became a professional thing pretty quickly. But, my first year or so, I sucked. I was awful. I was still learning, and everybody has to learn. And now, I've been doing it for more than 30 years, much more confident. But also in the studio too, I think anytime you're starting out, there's a lot to learn, and your confidence is low, and then you've been doing it, you put in your 10,000 hours, and you're still pretty, much more confident, and confident that whatever situation comes up, you can deal with it. Sometimes you still get a little nervous about how am I going to make this work out or whatever, but yeah, for sure, a lot more confident. But like I said, the studio is the same thing, like when I first started getting opportunities to sit in the chair to be engineer on a session, I was nervous, does that snare sound okay? Is it all right? And you've been doing it for a while, and now I'm like, I don't have that worry anymore,
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm at a point where I'm mostly mixing these days, so my recording dates are fewer and far between. However, when I do them, my intention is to try to make everybody feel as good as possible and make the vibe as cool as possible, so that not only as they're tracking do they have a great time, but as they come in to the control room and I hit playback, it almost sounds as close to a mix as I can get. So I've started to spend a little more time up front, putting together recording templates so that kind of blur the line between the tracking and the mixing.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting. Definitely. You want you want the musicians to come into that control room for the first listen, and you want them to be psyched. You want it to sound like a record as much as you can. For sure. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. That's interesting. I mix primarily or pretty much entirely in the box. But when I'm tracking, I don't really do any processing in the box. I do pretty much do it all with outboard gear. So I don't have as much of a template. I might use a reverb in the box or something like that, but I don't use templates as much for tracking. So that's really interesting. And I think part of that is because I have the outboard gear available and I can, and definitely there's the philosophy of doing processing on the way in, baking it in, getting it to tape. I do save some stuff for the mix for sure. I use a template for tracking, but it's a very simplified template, and it's mostly just about whatever the inputs are going to be for that tracking session. I have the tracks are laid out and labeled and that kind of stuff. Without
going down the gear rabbit hole, I'm curious about your decision-making nowadays about gear purchases or equipping your studio to where you feel comfortable. Have you kind of got to a point where you've got your gear and you've kind of settled into place, or is it constant horse trading, as they say, of this piece isn't working, let's try a new piece, or is that experimentation still exist for you?
I have never ever been good at getting rid of gear. I tend to hang on to things. I have stuff I probably should have sold a long time ago, and I'm just not good at letting go of stuff. So there's not a lot of horse trading. I still buy stuff. I definitely in more recent years have moved towards exercising restraint in purchasing. For one thing, because I do have enough gear now. Like I can run a session. I've probably got what I need. Sometimes there's a thing here or there that I might like to get because it's going to sound awesome or whatever. I probably don't need to buy a bunch of gear. Like probably don't need new stuff. But also spending more time thinking about, I need to be saving money for retirement. And I've been doing that. I've been doing that all along, but thinking about, okay, I've got X amount of money available. I could buy a new microphone, or I could put that into savings, and I probably don't really need that new microphone, and the savings I probably really do need, and so maybe I should fund my IRA with that money, and so I've definitely moved in that direction in more recent years.
Yeah, it's funny over time as we grow older and we see retirement as a possibility more so than we did when we were younger.
Yeah.
So our rationalization changes a bit. And I think I said this years ago in the podcast. I have a desire to try things. I don't necessarily need to own them, but I see things and I think it'd be really nice to have that for a couple weeks to try it out and not own it in the long run, or see if it finds its way into my workflow. Because I've definitely purchased things where in the past where I thought, oh no, I don't know if this is, I think my consumer desires overtook me, and then it shows up and you're like, oh great, now what? Now I got to patch it in and I got to make it part of the workflow. I almost look at it like a timeshare condo or timeshare in a vacation spot. Once you have it, you feel compelled to use it because you've paid for it or you're paying for it.
Yeah, there was a time period when I was buying lots of plugins. Like, oh, Waves is having a sale. I should buy some plugins, and I've got so many plugins that I never use. And I definitely exercise a lot more restraint in the plugin department in recent years. And I find like I have a few basic things that I use, and sometimes there's a new thing that's super cool, and I might try it out, and maybe I'll buy it because I think I'll use it, whatever. But I think so too.
The plugin thing's tricky on the mixing front for me because people will send me tracks to mix and they'll send me where the current session is at.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I love it when I can open their session and there's no missing, you don't have this plugin. It's like, oh, I already have all those plugins and that works. But I think that it tricks me a little bit when I get the session it opens up and there's a missing plugin. You're like, well, what plugin is that? What are they doing? And it's like something kind of odd or esoteric. And it sends me down a new rabbit hole to go, well, what is that? Do I need that? Should I buy that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
for sure.
And a second comment, Waves is always having a sale. Are they not?
Yes. Which, yeah, fair enough. It's been a good marketing strategy for them, clearly. So
clearly, yeah. That's an interesting thing because I remember the days of the boxed platinum bundles for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then now we're at a state where, the average plugin over there is like 29 to $50.
Yeah.
So, what's your tolerance like for pricing of plugins?
Well, Waves has, I think, spoiled us all a little bit. I definitely, nowadays, I might wait for something to go on sale or that kind of thing. I feel comfortable buying a $29.99 plugin. Sometimes things come out that seem really awesome from some other company that maybe I'll spend a couple $100 on, but that's pretty rare. Just in general, stepping back from buying plugins, I try to be hesitant to spend money on plugins nowadays. And like I said, I have a lot already.
Yeah. And when I see plugins in the $150 to $500 range, I'm immediately like, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Same. But like I said, there are occasionally ones that just, I'll think about it and it seems like it'd be really useful and it sounds amazing. And I'll buy an occasional plugin in that range, but I'm definitely hesitant.
With your own place comes a lot of benefits. You can leave stuff set up.
Yes.
You get to pick and choose all of the gear in use. Do you kind of stick to, we mentioned templates in Pro Tools and such. Do you have kind of a workflow or a template that you stick to when recording artists at your place?
So, well, I definitely use a template for mixing, for sure. Yeah. As far as a template for recording artists at my place, so my place is smaller, so I don't track bands at my place. I can't do drums at my place, that kind of thing. I definitely do some overdubs. I'll do guitars, vocals, a little percussion. I've got a Hammond organ, stuff like that. So I don't know if there's a template for the recording part of it in terms of in the box. I create a new track and I set it up and I go.
Or out of the box. Do you have a particular vocal chain that you kind of put on, use every time?
Yeah, I do. I do have a particular vocal chain. I actually carry my vocal chain. So I have my own studio, but then there's a bigger studio called the Hallowed Halls, and I'm still working out of there, and that's where I go to track. But I do take some of my gear with me when I go to track. So I take my vocal chain with me because I really like it. I don't have one particular preamp I'm using in my vocal chain. I often use a Daking preamp because I really like those. I just got a Gordon preamp in the past year or so. I think I'm going to start using that for vocals more. It just depends a little bit. Daking is often the things though, that because it sounds great. I have a Empirical Labs Little Freak EQ, and that's my EQ that I use for my vocal chain. And it's got a built-in de-esser that I might use, but it's just a great, powerful, flexible EQ that if I need to dial in an EQ. And then my current compressor is a Retro 176 that sounds amazing. And then I have various vocal mics, and I really am a big fan of doing the shootout. Sometimes the SM7 wins, sometimes it's the tube condenser mic, whatever it is. So I like to put up a few different mics and have the vocalists sing. And I like to try to do a blind shootout. So I'll record, whatever, 4 or 5 mics with the vocalist singing, maybe just a chorus, or I don't want to wear them out or whatever, but just a short passage, and try to set the levels so they're very comparable. And then hopefully I've got an assistant on the session, or I rope in one of the band members who knows their way around Pro Tools a little bit, and I'll name the channels something like A, B, C, and D, and then I tell them, you're going to you're going to take a piece of paper and you're going to say, okay, A equals 3 and B equals 6 and whatever. And so they're going to operate Pro Tools, and as we listen back, and so I'm going to sit somewhere where I can't see the screen, and so it's a double blind test. So I don't know which track is playing back because they've come up with their own code for, this is vocal mic 1, and I don't know what 1 is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we can all kind of listen blind, and everybody kind of takes notes, and then we talk about, okay, what did everybody like? Which mic did everybody like? And usually there's one or two that people gravitate towards, and then we do the big reveal. Well, this is the mic, and it's kind of fun. People get, it's kind of exciting. People get into it a little bit, and it's double blind, so try to remove as much bias and just choose the mic that sounds the best.
What do you do in the case where the singer favors one particular mic that differs from your preference?
That's such a good question, Matt. It has been hard for me to let go of what I think is best, but I have come to realize over time that I weigh heavily what the singer's preference is. Because if they're sitting there, and sometimes they have a preference from out on the floor while they're singing, before we even get to the blind listening, they're like, oh, that mic, I like that one. And I pay a lot of attention to that, because if they're going to be psyched about what they're hearing while they're singing, that's going to affect their performance tremendously. And so I have, as I've gotten older, I've gotten wiser and realized that if the singer has a preference, I should pay heavy attention to that.
Yeah. That's a great perspective too. Do you, over time, and you kind of mentioned as we grow older and wiser about these things, do you have a strategy nowadays, things that you put into practice to try to make the session as frictionless, as smooth, to get everybody on the same page? Like, is there any things that you could put into words to talk about that?
Yeah. One thing is I try to get everything set up in advance. So if I know we're going to be doing tracking, and then we're going to do a Hammond organ overdub or whatever it is, piano overdub or whatever it is, I try to have all that stuff set up ahead of time. And separate, Hallowed Halls is big enough and there's enough gear there, and I bring in some gear and whatever. Like, I can have separate recording chains for everything and have them all set up and ready to go, and not really have to, if you have a smaller setup and you don't have as much gear, maybe, once you're done tracking drums, maybe you have to take those mics and start using them on vocals or whatever, other stuff, and that's fine. That's what you have to do to make it work. But if I can, I want to have separate chains set up for everything, tested, ready to go. So once we actually get into the session, if somebody's like, oh, I'd like to sing a vocal on that, I can just be like, great, walk into that room there, put on those headphones, I'm going to put this track and record ready, and we're ready to go. So trying to minimize the time musicians have to wait for things to happen as much as I can. There's still slowdowns or whatever. But yeah, so that's, and if there's a problem, if something's not working, trying to solve it as quickly as I can, or if somebody comes up with, hey, something that was unexpected, I think we should do a gang vocal on this, or whatever it is, hand claps or something. Like, if I can, maybe I'll just use a mic set that's already set up in the room, like maybe the overhead mics or some other mic that's set up in the room, as opposed to taking time to set up a new mic. If there's something already ready to go that I could just use and it'll sound pretty good, in the interest of keeping things moving along, in the middle of a session, I try to do things like that. So that's definitely part of it. And attitude, just maintaining just kind of a vibe that it's friendly and comfortable, and hopefully, as much as I can with my attitude, making the musicians feel comfortable and at ease, and not worried about things and that kind of thing.
Are there things that you used to do when you were much younger that you've gotten over and have moved past in the studio environment when tracking with people?
Yeah. One thing might be, spending a long time experimenting with, let's try different mics, or let's try different preamps or whatever. I do, like I said, I like to do a vocal mic shootout. I think that's worthwhile. We make it kind of a fun event, hopefully, so maybe that's not feeling like a drag to the musicians. And it's exciting, hopefully, a little bit. Again, trying to keep things moving, keep momentum up as much as I can. And hopefully I wasn't too much of a drag in that way when I was younger, but I'm sure I've gotten more smooth in my session flow as I've gotten older.
How does it work for you? Like, obviously we deal in all kinds of personalities with the artists that we work with. And sometimes, we take on projects that we want to be involved with, but sometimes the personalities and I wouldn't attribute it to experience per se, but sometimes you get personalities that are a little extra grumpy in the studio just because that's who they are as musicians. Do you just kind of roll with that? How do you adjust your own demeanor do you try to match? Do you try to lift up? Do you try to stay neutral? Like dealing in personalities, how do you focus on that?
It's a good question. I think I rarely get somebody who's super grumpy or whatever. Most of the time, the musicians are very excited to be there, and if they're having, if they have maybe a negative attitude, let's say, or it's probably because they're nervous about something, or they feel like they're not performing up to their potential, or maybe it's because there's something going wrong technically or something like that. I think I'm naturally an optimistic kind of person and have kind of a positive attitude, and I definitely try to emphasize that in the studio, being reassuring, being patient. If somebody's having a hard time getting a part, I think, being very reassuring, like, oh, it's no big deal. We've got so much space on this hard disk. Let's just do another one. It's fine. Like that kind of stuff, and just really positive attitude, and usually that helps. But also, I rarely find myself having to deal with particularly negative attitudes from musicians, fortunately.
I always struggle with this. Like, there's days I go into the studio and I feel like, okay, we're just going to put all the songs, all the takes in the same Pro Tools session just to keep it rolling. And then there's other days I go in and I'm like, nope, we're going to give every song its own Pro Tools session. And obviously that comes with its pros and cons for speed of getting everything up and running. Yeah. Do you have a preference on that?
Yeah, I do. I always put individual songs. I just realized I said always, and I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, but I pretty much always put songs in individual Pro Tools files. And usually the format's going to be the same, like the setup is going to be the same for the band from song to song. So after we finish the first song, I use that to make a template. And so when I'm opening up the new song, when it's time to switch to the new song, we're going to start a new song, I use that template from the last one. And so that speeds things along. And I just tell them, okay, we're switching to a new song. It's going to take me a few minutes to set it up, take a break. And we kind of get into that flow, and it's fine. But organizationally, I find having them all in separate song files, separate sessions is helpful to keep the audio files separate and not have things mingled in together. And just in terms of keeping things organized and keeping track of the files, I find that very useful.
Do you have this? I have this problem quite a bit. And the problem is that I have clients that love to squeeze as many songs in as possible, as many overdubs in as possible in a given period of time. And I'm always the one trying to reduce the amount of stuff that we're doing so that we can put better quality and attention to detail and critical listening into what we're, I would prefer to do a few songs rather than a bunch. But
of course, do a few songs well rather than a whole bunch in a mediocre way.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So I usually definitely get artists, and people are on a tight budget. It makes sense. I get it. Like, we've got this 10-song record we want to do, and we only have enough money for a day or two of studio time. That's very common. And when I'm starting, when I get an inquiry about a project, usually there's a phone call, and I talk to them about, what do you want to do, and what are your goals, and also more mundane technical, like how many toms does the drum kit have, and just advancing. And that's definitely a conversation that happens. Like, they tell me, we want to do this many songs, and in that conversation early on, we kind of break it down, and it'll be like, okay, well, we want to do 10 songs, over 2 days. There's going to be some time to set up. it's going to take this much time to set up. And so, realistically, this is how much recording time we have. If it's going to be 10 songs, that means that we're only going to have an hour and a half per song. So let's think about that a little bit, is maybe that's, and we have that conversation about maybe it's better to do a 5-song EP and do it really well because that's going to represent your band better. But maybe, also maybe their goal is like, we're not that concerned about selling records. We just have this band we've had for a long time and we just want to document. We want to have something that documents all these songs. So you have to take into account what their goals are too. But usually I try to steer things towards the better quality for sure. And usually we come to some kind of understanding in that early on conversation. Yeah, so that's kind of my approach to that. And I try to, sometimes people haven't been in the studio much, maybe don't have a realistic idea of how much time it takes. Understandably, if you haven't really done it before, it is surprising how much time it takes to do stuff. But you're playing the songs through. There's, you got to listen back and see if you like that take. Maybe then make some adjustments to the arrangement and all that kind of stuff. I've also had bands. We have this conversation, and they say, well, we're going to really rehearse a lot, and we're going to be prepared, and I'm a little skeptical, but I'm like, okay, good. And I've had bands come in and rip through, 10 songs in 2 days or whatever it is and kill it because they were rehearsed and they were ready to go. And maybe they didn't have the expectation that we were going to do a bunch of overdubs. Maybe it was just basic tracks, But I think it's a matter of kind of working with them, having that conversation about what are your goals for this project? What's realistic? Here's how much time, kind of gaming it out. Okay, well, here's how much time this will probably take, and we should allow some time for this, and just kind of figuring out a plan ahead of time.
I find myself saying this to even the most experienced of my clients, and that is, remember, it always takes far longer than we all think it's going to take.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've been doing it. I'm the person who does it a lot. Like bands come in, they make one record a year, maybe even not even that often. I do it a lot. And it still takes more time than I think it's going to take, and I kind of have learned to sort of allow for that. But yeah.
My frustration with the Pro Tools workflow or the DAW workflow in general is that it speeds up things as opposed to an analog tape workflow where it slows things down sometimes to a fault. But I have singers like, yeah, that's good enough. And then we get into mixing and then they're like, oh, shit. And I'm like, I know. Oh, shit. Now we're in Melodyne. Yeah. Now I'm shifting your timing and, now we're trying to correct for the rush.
Yeah.
So I hate to say it, but there's clients of mine that I've had for a long time. I try to educate without berating them, obviously, because, I don't want to be the one that says, I fucking told you so. I've been telling you this for 15 years and you still don't listen to me.
Yeah.
I try not to do that. But I do try to keep up the educational, like, well, there's a lesson for next time.
Yeah, for sure. And, as much as I'm sure you do this too, as much as I can, when we're in the studio doing it, I'll be like, oh, why don't we try another one, or, that kind of thing. And of course there's a whole diplomacy to how you say that take's not good enough. And you try to couch it in positive terms and keep their attitude positive and don't make them feel down about themselves. Because they shouldn't feel down about themselves. Most people don't get it on the first take and people are nervous about that, but they shouldn't be, and you try to reassure them. Of course, you have to feel the room out. I'm usually not the quote unquote producer, although effectively I'm usually co-producing or something like that, something in there. And most artists I work with are receptive and appreciative of that. But, you have to also feel out, some people don't want your advice and some people probably don't need it. And that's fine too. But generally, if I feel like we're not getting the performance or it needs another one, I'll try to say that. And oftentimes they will be like, oh, okay. And we do another one. And so trying to get as much as I can up front, get the performance right so we don't have to Melodyne so much or whatever. But it's always, it varies from client to client. Yeah.
Are you mostly working in a rock or pop kind of world, or is there jazz or hip hop or other genres?
Yeah, I mostly do I'd say rock and sort of rock adjacent, Americana maybe, stuff like that. I wish there was more jazz. I used to do a lot of jazz live sound because I worked at a jazz club for a while, but I still do some of that. Some of the things I do in the studio are a little jazz oriented. I would love to be doing more jazz. That'd be awesome. It just kind of, depends what comes to me. But I do a wide variety of genres, but probably a little more weighted towards the rock and sort of that kind of band setup. I don't do much hip hop. And I think people come to me because I have access to the studio that's great for tracking a live band, and that's kind of my modus operandi, like live musicians playing together. And so those projects tend to come to me because I'm good with that, and I can facilitate that, and that's so I tend to get a lot of that kind of thing.
I bring the jazz and thing up in the other genres because I find that the capture process for jazz, I find it so much more pleasurable because, you get a group of players who really know how to play, who play a lot, who play off each other.
Yeah.
And the rules or the MO for rock, very different. And the insecurities are different. It's just, I find that I could put things up, hit record, and then they come in and they're truly critiquing like the broader picture, I feel, in my experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it one more time. There's rarely can you punch me in there? Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't get that as much.
Yeah. Interesting. I think in any genre, when I have an opportunity to work with really good musicians, that's just a good day, I think that happens. And maybe it happens more in jazz because you have to be better to play jazz, But jazz does have a different aesthetic, for sure. And I find it enjoyable as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the business of it all. Looking at pre-COVID activity on your part, your clients, the amount of work you had, post-COVID activity, just doing an A/B comparison, not talking about what happened in between during the pandemic, but on either side of the pandemic. Do you have any keen observations about the amount of work you've had?
Yeah. I think I've had more work since COVID. Like I'm busier since COVID. I think part of that just has to do with I've been in Portland longer now, and I'm more established, and more people know me. And so, as you're in a place longer, you meet more people, your client base expands. I think that's part of it. I will say on the live sound side of things, it's gotten really busy since COVID. There was a time period, shows started to gradually come back, and then all of a sudden things kind of hit. And there weren't enough live sound engineers in Portland to take all the gigs. Like the demand was just crazy. And I think part of that was just a lot of shows started happening at once. Part of it was probably over the course of the pandemic. I think some people who had been doing it kind of dropped out and started doing other things, by necessity, or I think some people also reevaluated like, there are some downsides to our lifestyle and the late hours and the instability of the work. And I think some people discovered things that fit their lives better too, But for a while after live concerts came back, it was just busy, like turning down work left and right, and venues, desperate to find engineers to, fill the slots. And it was a good time for people who were looking to get into the business, for sure. And it's calmed down. It's evened out a little bit since then in the past couple of years, but it's still busy with live sound, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that I'm no economist, but I'm sure that there's a lot of economic factors in particular related to that. Just overflow that happened after COVID, because everybody had been out of work for a long time. From venues to merchandise manufacturers to the bands to the technicians, lighting, sound, etc. Everybody involved in the process, bartenders. So to have that all come back, it's just like gangbusters afterwards. So much going on.
Yeah.
What are your current challenges that you're dealing with these days? Like what are common things that you're seeing, either challenges for yourself or your clients, or whether that's in live sound or live performance or studio recording and musicians coming in to work in the studio?
I think largely the same as it, and maybe we're not even talking about pre-COVID, post-COVID now, but largely the same as it was pre-COVID. I think, for bands, it's the music industry has changed over the past 10, 20 years. And so it's still, for making recordings, it's a challenge to justify spending money on a product that maybe isn't going to sell much. Like if you're a band looking to make a record, are you going to make money from selling that record? Maybe not as much as you would have 20 years ago, and so that's, I think, a challenge. And so finding money is always a challenge for bands who are self financing. That's a big thing. That's what comes to mind immediately.
How involved are you in the after part of the record making? Do you do any hand holding to show people, oh yeah, this is how you upload your stuff to, the services, or this is how you make vinyl, or like how much involvement do you have beyond the recording and mixing?
Very little, actually. I think I have a little bit of involvement. Like I don't really do mastering. Like I record and I mix. I don't really do mastering. It's not my specialty. So I try to steer my clients towards, mastering engineers that I like or whatever. And I try to give them advice on that. So that's maybe the extent of my involvement post the record making. And a little bit of advice. I'm sure some engineers provide more guidance to their clients in terms of, here's how you should go about pressing a record, or even here's how you promote a record, or that kind of, and I think that's probably valuable, and it would be valuable for me to have that kind of advice to give my clients, but I don't really know much about what happens, in terms of here's how you should proceed after the record's made. So that is not an area of my expertise, but I think we as audio engineers, it's probably a valuable thing to know if you can help your clients out in that way.
And so you may or may not know the answer to this as a result of that answer, but I'm to understand that CDs are actually starting to see a bit of a comeback, because people, and I don't know if it's a generational thing or not, but people are digging just something tangible, and vinyl manufacturing is pretty damn costly. Big time lag. CDs and cassettes are far more economical to make, quicker to get. Like you can get a run of 100 discs or 100 cassettes in a short period of time, whereas printing a vinyl record, a pressed record, takes, could take anywhere from 3 to 6 to 9 months to get back at a great cost.
That's interesting. I have not noticed CDs coming back. I'm going to look out for that. I like CDs as a format. I would love for them to come back. I'm not a fan of cassettes, and I do think, mostly because of sound quality. I think cassettes can be fun. I think there's been a resurgence of cassettes, at least on the indie scene, that's been happening for at least 10 years. And I think that was because when vinyl came back, what you're talking about, the expense and the difficulty of getting vinyl made, people still wanted to have some physical thing. Consumers, fans still want to have the physical thing that they can open up and look at the liner notes, and there's artwork, and bands still want to have that to be able to sell to their fans or to give to their fans or whatever. And so there was the difficulty with vinyl. So it made sense that, okay, but we can do cassettes because they are cheaper and easier. And that's a thing. But I would love to see CDs come back to fill that slot, because I think the audio quality in CDs is great. And you don't have to worry about the CD player eating your CD like it might with a tape as well, or stretching it out or whatever.
Yes. And I'm seeing on the consumer side, I'm seeing more CD players crop up.
Interesting.
portable units.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a CD player and a cassette player here just because I do, some audio pros do, but the average consumer, well, of course, if you look at my car, which is a 2007 Honda CR-V, I still have a 6-disc CD changer in there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I still have a cassette deck in my car, but it doesn't work anymore. But it's there. But I've got a CD player in my car as well.
But it is a quandary I struggle with a lot, and I worry about a lot, because if our clients, musicians, don't have an avenue to make money off of a product, and I'm sorry to use the word product, but off of something that a piece of art that they're creating with us, if there's not an outlet to sell it, the odds of them coming back go down, I feel.
Absolutely.
And I worry about that.
I do too. 100%. Yeah. And there's some avenues that have gotten better in terms of like there's sync licensing and, having some video project use your song and then paying you money for it. So there's some avenues like that maybe have gotten better over time. But yeah, I think it's a huge issue in the way the economics of the industry work. It's not great for the artists, and by extension, it's not great for us either. That there's not such a direct path for them to make money as there used to be. The value of a high quality recording, is several things. One is there's a document of what the band did and that they can be proud of. And even if the band splits up, they've got this document of this is what we were doing in that moment of time. There's the ability to use it to sell to your fans and make money to support the band. There is the ability of using the recording as something to further your relationship with your fans, that relationship, and have something for your fans to listen to. There's, maybe use it for sync, maybe you use that recording to be able to get gigs, to publicize your band, all kinds of things. But it used to be when I got into the industry, it was very, very direct, very straightforward. You make a record, you sell it, you make money, and that's how you support your band. And it doesn't work that way anymore. And I worry about that too.
I'm hoping, and I don't know the numbers on this, but I'm hoping that the physical sales at shows are on an upward trajectory for bands, because, they basically have to sell merchandise, whether it be t-shirts and their recordings, to really augment their income. Because I don't know what I would do if I was in a band today. Yeah,
absolutely.
Little bit of outside the box thinking, but definitely something that I ponder. Well, first off, when it comes to your recording clients, and I'm sure that the answer is different for your live clients, because live clients are coming through, bands are coming through town. So you kind of get kind of a tide pool effect of clients on the live side. But on the studio side, would you say that most of your clients are based in Portland or the surrounding area?
Yeah. One thing that's changed a little bit in more recent years is I have started getting occasional clients coming in from, not Portland, but a city not too far away. Like I worked with a client from Boise pretty recently. That was really fun. They came in and we made a record. But mostly Portland. And it's one really nice thing about doing a lot of live sound is I meet a lot of musicians locally, and get to know them and work with them and that's how I end up getting a lot of my recording clients too, is just through those connections. Was there ever, or is there a fear of being pigeonholed as only a live sound person? Because sometimes people, they segment us off and they go, oh, he's a live sound person. Oh, he's a studio guy. Yeah, that's absolutely, it's a real problem. I think it was more of an issue when I lived in Nashville, just because of the nature of that town. But I think it's still an issue here in Portland. All the time I'll talk to bands about, hey, I also make recordings, and they're surprised, even though I've been doing it since I've been here forever. And I've probably maybe even mentioned it to some of them before, but people see me doing live sound. And so that's what they think of. My social media presence is more about the recording stuff for that reason, because I'm trying to balance out the perception, like everybody in Portland knows I do live sound because they see me out at shows. But to know I do recordings, you'd have to see me in the studio, and there's not so many people there. It's the band you're working with, or maybe they see a recording that I made, or listen, see if people ever read liner notes, maybe they see the credit on the album that I made that they're listening to, or something like that.
Tell me if you agree with this. And disagreeing, of course, I don't think is necessarily wrong in this case, but I'm just curious because this is my perspective. My perspective is that nowadays, as an audio professional, and I think I'm biased because I have this podcast and I have things I have to do to make this podcast happen. I feel that the audio professional today needs to be adept at self-promotion, a little bit of social or a lot of social media, but they also have to be, have an aptitude for getting on a Zoom call like you're doing now with me and presenting themselves remotely for interview purposes and things like that, podcasts, whatever it might be, or even just interacting with a band remotely. Mm-hmm. Would you, is there any part of that you agree with or disagree with?
100% agree with, you have to be adept at self-promoting, which probably has always been true for freelance audio professionals trying to get recording work or whatever they're doing. Mm-hmm. But nowadays that definitely means social media, at least as part of it. It's because that's, how are you going to get your next gig? How are you going to keep getting gigs? You have to, that's part of being a freelance engineer. The interview thing, that a Zoom call thing, yeah, that makes sense. I don't do that as much, although here we're doing it today. Mm-hmm. But it is, certainly, especially I think if you're doing remote work, which I do some of, that's important to be able to interact with clients in a remote way, maybe via Zoom or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And video, there is, if you're just on a phone call, there's some nuance you miss without having the visuals. So, yeah, I think it's a skill. It's part of the skill set now.
As I do these interviews, I ponder these things and think about, the perspective of not only our clients, but the aspect of how we survive and thrive in this world.
And I will say, like, along with that, the ability to have a phone call or a video call or something like that, and to to sell yourself or to pitch your involvement in a project, or even to just communicate with the potential client and find out what their needs are and see if you're a good fit, and to communicate about how you can help them achieve their goals. And that is definitely part of the skill set.
I almost feel like if you don't do it, it's the out of sight, out of mind concept where, otherwise, the world's attention is on their phones these days. And maybe that's going to change in the future. I don't know. But for now, all the posting that I do, I get comments from people all the time. Man, you look like you're crazy busy. Mm-hmm. You're traveling everywhere. And it's just like, well, yeah, kind of not crazy busy, but, busy.
Yeah.
It is interesting. But my point is that others see that and they go, oh, okay. They're thinking about you. And therefore, if it's musicians that are seeing that, hopefully they're thinking about you if that's your business.
Absolutely. I think that's always been the case. It's just that social media is the new medium for it. But it's always been like the perception that you're busy as a freelancer, or just that people see you doing things that, even before there was really social media, there was like, oh, David did that project, or have you heard this thing, or, the musicians would talk amongst themselves or whatever. It was always that dynamic of maintaining perception of what you're just being in the view of the potential clients. It's always been that thing. It's just now that social media is the way it happens. But maybe it is more so nowadays.
My other concern, revolves around the opposite side of that. I have friends, fellow audio professionals, who they're not very good at it, and that's okay. But at the same time, they're worried about posting. They're worried about what other people think. And therefore they're there's a lot of inaction, and they're not always really, they're struggling a bit, and trying to maintain, being an audio professional. And I've had some conversations with some people where I really try to encourage them to, step out a little bit. But what would be your advice to those that are kind of like, no, I don't do that social media thing. I have a studio, I do my work, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I in general, I would say that it is useful and helpful to engage with social media. I don't do it as much as I think I probably should, but I have some presence, and but it is hard. It's like an additional job. It's the same thing for bands. Bands have to promote themselves, and it's like doing a second job. It's the same thing for us, and I think. One piece of advice is it doesn't have to be super polished. I think as engineers, we're used to trying to make things super high quality and really refining it and that kind of thing. And I do that. Like, it takes me forever when I make I'm going to sit down and make an Instagram post. It takes me much longer than it's the studio thing again. It takes longer than you think it's going to take. And part of that is because I think I have this mentality that comes from what I do professionally, that it needs to be really polished and blah, blah, blah. And the norm on social media is not quite so polished. And so that's one thing to maybe try to keep in mind. Like, it doesn't have to be super duper or whatever. And also, you don't have to post every day, I think, but try to maintain some kind of presence. Like, if somebody comes to your account, whatever it is, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Those are the two I use still. And you want them to see that you posted something maybe within the last week or two, ideally, hopefully, rather than your last post was a year ago, so just at least occasional things. Maybe it's like making a record, like rather than 10 songs done in a rushed way, maybe do 3 songs that are good, so maybe occasional posts, trying to be a little bit consistent with it, trying to put up something that just shows you're doing something interesting or just shows, whatever. It's hard for me, like in the middle of a session, especially a tracking date, like I don't really have time to I try to remember to take a few pictures or a video, but I'm really busy, like I'm taking care of the job. If I have an assistant, I'll ask them, hey, when you get a chance, could you just snap a few pictures of the session for me and send it to me later? And like, I definitely don't have time to make a social media post while I'm in a session. Like, there's no way. Like, I'm doing, again, the job takes my attention. So I'll get those pictures, and maybe the next day or the day after, I'll put a few posts up, like, here's some pictures from the session I just did or whatever. But, you do the best you can and try to do a little bit, I think, is good advice.
In your live sound work, do you often have the opportunity to record those shows, multi-track those shows?
I probably, if I wanted to take it upon myself to do that, I probably could do it all the time. I only do that when people hire me to do it, and it doesn't come up that often. And I don't actively promote that. It's more like if people ask, hey, can you multi-track this for us? Then we have that discussion. Like, yeah, I can, absolutely. Here's what it would involve. Do you want to do that? And sometimes they're like, yeah. And so I do it occasionally, but lately not that often.
I'm not trying to impose this on you, but if I were a live sound person, I would multi-track. I would try to find a slick way that's not too intrusive on the workflow.
Yeah.
And my own setup and my own gear. I would try to find a way to multi-track every single show and offer it to the band and say, I have the multi-tracks. I can mix that and send that to you, and as a way to introduce them to, the studio side of what I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's really not a bad idea at all. And it's interesting too. So I work at different venues in terms of live sound, and some of the consoles have set up so it'd be very easy to multi-track. Some of them you put a SD card into it and hit go and it's ready to go. And some of them don't have any built-in facility, and you'd have to bring extra equipment and that kind of thing. So, but in some situations it would be quite easy to do that. There might be a consideration of asking the band in advance, is it okay with you if I multi-track the thing we're about to do? And that might be a good practice. Most bands probably aren't going to mind as long as you don't do anything with it without their permission. That's the bare minimum. But I know you make a good point, and I think that might be a viable sort of additional business model kind of thing. I haven't implemented that. I might think about it.
I'm full of too many ideas and too much coffee at all times. So you'll have to bear with me there.
That's all good. But I think for everybody out there listening, somebody's going to hear that and think, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And it's probably a really great idea.
I'm always thinking in terms of like, here's an opportunity to capture a moment that's going to come and go. And sometimes I think the bands are like, oh man, too bad we didn't record that.
Yeah. And every now and then a band says that to me. That was an amazing show. It's too bad we didn't record that. Like, that has been said, no doubt.
Well, very cool. So for the audience, obviously all the usual show note stuff will be there, social media, website stuff.
Matt, it just occurred to me, there's one other thing that's kind of interesting that I've been doing more recently that it might be worth a mention.
Please.
And I've done this a little bit in the past, but lately I've been teaching private lessons for recording, which has been really fun. I have occasionally, there's not too many clients I do this with, but I have one client who records his own music and put together a studio and contacted me and just said, hey, can you give me a little help? I need some advice on how to set up the studio and that kind of thing. And so it started there. And then he asked me, well, can you come teach me about mic technique and stuff like that. And then we've covered some mixing stuff too. So every now and then he calls me up and I go over to his studio and we spend a few hours and he tells me what he wants to know about. And then I tell him what I can about different techniques and how to approach things. And it's been really fun to kind of pass on some of the knowledge I've picked up and that interaction is just enjoyable too. I think I enjoy the teaching aspect of it. So that's been a really fun kind of side thing I've been doing a little bit.
And do you do that hourly?
Yeah, we just do it hourly.
That makes sense. It's tough making money in this and just to survive in general sometimes in this business. And so any little tidbit of, like your teaching thing or recording the multi-tracks at live shows or, any of this stuff, I think we kind of have to pay attention to, we have to think outside the box and realize that we have really a lot of us that are on the professional level, those of us that are charging money to do what we do.
Yes.
We have a lot of talent and a lot of information to share with others.
Yeah.
And best that we pass it on to an upcoming generation as well.
I think so. I 100% agree. And when I was coming up in Nashville, when I was an intern and then an assistant, there were plenty of engineers who shared their knowledge with me. And it feels good to kind of participate in that chain and pass things on to other people. One of the things I really enjoy about the Hallowed Halls and going to track at the bigger studio is they have an intern program there. And I really enjoy that interaction. Sometimes, when the moment's appropriate, sometimes some of them will ask me a question or, sometimes they just learn by watching what I do or whatever. Or if I have time, I'll just while we're tearing down the studio after the session, I might just say, hey, here's something I did and here's why I did it. And I really enjoy that interaction and participating in that sort of full circle moment of, I was learning when I came up, how people helped me out, and then I can kind of pass that along now. It's really nice.
Do you primarily work out of Hallowed Halls when you're tracking elsewhere, or do you split that up amongst other studios in the
almost always Hallowed Halls. Okay. It's a good studio, and I know it very well. And it's a good place to work out of. So yeah, pretty much always there. If a client came to me and said, hey, we really want to work at this other studio, I'd be like, okay. But most of the time people are psyched to work there and it works out really well.
And for the audience, I want to also mention Justin Phelps, who was on episode number 82. Justin works out of Hallowed Halls. I assume he still does.
Yeah, he does. He's one of the owners of the studio, and he is one of the, maybe the main person, but certainly one of the people that keeps it running, and has a lot to do with that. Yeah, so he's still over there for sure. And shout out to Justin.
And just kind of connecting the dots there, we're talking about, like interns and assistants and stuff. Justin used to intern or assist, I believe, for John Cunaberti, who's been on the show. And, this is where I struggle on that front, is the interns and assistants, because I primarily mix out of my home. And when I track, and that's few and far between, I just don't have a system that is conducive to bring people in like that,
right?
Because I'm such a bit of a lone wolf in that way.
Yeah.
So do you have a way to deal with that? Because I'm sure you get emails or phone calls. Hey, can I come intern for you?
Yeah, I do get those sometimes for sure. And outside of the Hallowed Hall situation, like at my personal studio, it's not really conducive to bringing people in, and I don't, I don't think it would work that well. So yeah, I don't have a good solution, except that I go work at this other studio, and that already has the intern thing in place.
Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
No, I don't. Nothing comes to mind. But I really appreciate you inviting me back. It's been really fun talking with you, Matt.
Yeah. It's great to talk to you. Great to see you again. And I love catching up with guests after this many years. So as once again, audience, show notes, look to it for website information for David, social media, past episodes, some of these guests that former guests we mentioned, like Justin Phelps and John Cunaberti. Well, great to see you. You take care. And thanks again for coming back. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for keeping this going. I think what you do is really valuable. I listen to it. It's really fun to check out what other engineers are doing and get some insights. And so thanks for keeping this up.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure that, I enjoy the hell out of it myself.
Right on.
Well, take care.
Yeah, you take care too. Thanks.